generated more than $4 billion.
4.3.
So we're talking about a sizable amount of money. That was far more actually than the government anticipated. From my perspective with the auction, I think that they ought to be thinking about how do you put in, what do you do with those proceeds beyond just putting into general revenue, which is what they did with the last auction. But there are a number of things, and it's not just about funding new media content. It's ensuring that all Canadians have access in appropriate fashion. It's about dealing with the broadcast transition as well, to move to digital TV, because actually the spectrum is being taken from the analog television signals, and there's going to be a lot of Canadians who lose their over-the-air signal as we move from analog to digital, and the question becomes, do you use some of that funding for that? I'm even more interested, though, in the rules associated with the auction, because in the past, the auctions have by and large been fairly closed. There are very few limits that are put, other than this past time, a set aside for some new entrants, which the incumbents, with respect, fought tooth and nail to try to stop that from taking place. I think the government, in its wisdom in that case, said, no way, we want to try to inject a measure of additional competition into the marketplace, and so we're going to get some new providers, instead of having the big 3 or 4, whatever it happens to be, buying up all of that spectrum the last time and having no competition. So I think that was a good step. We can now take another step by bringing in some of those principles of open innovation, using white spaces, trying to make us a sandbox for innovation around wireless, tear down some of the foreign investment restrictions so that we can bring in the T-Mobiles and Verizon, some of the other players into this marketplace and inject some kind of competition here, as opposed to talking about how are we going to send out or distribute out the revenue we get from spectrum.
Dave?
Well, of course, there's no competition, so when we sit down on a Monday morning reviewing what's happening with the 20 brands that we're fighting daily in Canada, of course, we don't see that, Michael. So, I mean, I find that very hard to understand why you say that. But first of all,
I say it because we rank on the OECD most recent ranking on broadband has us 28th out of 30 countries, ahead of only Poland and Mexico. When we take a look at broadband on the basis of what you pay for price and speed, I say it on the basis, if you take a look at when the iPhone came into the marketplace, we had one provider that could bring it into the marketplace, and that their initial data pricing was an absolute joke compared to every other country in the world. I say it because it doesn't take, all you have to do is go almost anywhere else to see what a vibrant, truly competitive wireless space looks like.
Whoa. So I find it very interesting. First of all, a number of the components used from the OECD report, in fact, don't pass muster. So for instance, on the cost, when we're looking at megabits per second, in fact, if you actually look at Canada, it's about $6-7 for TELUS, which would put us up about number 8 as opposed to number 28. So I think it depends on the information. If you use rural satellite internet access as part of this, you're exactly right, it blows it wide apart. But it's a function of where you are. And if you actually go into where most people are being served, in fact, we're ranking pretty up there. In terms of wireless, when you start using your facts, in fact, at the moment, we offer the 3rd cheapest per minute rate if you actually look through the developed countries. I mean, this is why I think some of the OECD numbers really need careful looking at, because they seem to have taken a series of points that if you put them together. So I disagree with that. But generally, just on the point of view of competition, I mean, we're going to get the competition anyway. But competition does not stimulate and generate new quality, new services. What it does, it hammers the hell out of the price point. And essentially, as that happens, you strip margin out of the business, and it starts getting simpler and simpler. So if you go into late-stage, high-volume markets, it's not about innovative products and services. In fact, the key thing, the innovation is now taking place exactly where Sarah wants it, which is at the edge of the networks, and it's no longer in the network. In fact, if I look at what has happened in the last 12 months particularly, most of the innovation is not coming from the carriers because it never should have. Basically, we're in the business of providing access pipes. The application innovation is now coming because finally there are stable operating systems. It's not fragmented into 40 OSs, but in fact you've got 2 or 3 major ones appearing, as you know. So, and Apple has got to be one of the most closed proprietary systems on the planet, and yet it's actually encouraging growth on the outside, which is exciting. And of course, there's the whole Google Android thing, which is going to impact not just wireless, but wireline. I don't know if any of you in the audience noticed, but on Wednesday, Microsoft did an astonishing thing. They confirmed that Windows 7 would not be compatible with ARM technology. which the ARM chips are basically what are driving the netbook, the whole revolution of netbooks. So it's sub $500, and Android, which is pretty much as open sourcey as you can get, is license free, is showing up. So the innovation is taking place in the right place. I feel that the arguments you make about competition are somewhat forced, to say the least.
Sarah, we have a question, but why don't you finish the point?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, we are seeing the advent of what was once off-deck content in the mobile space, and I'm a big mover in the mobile space, but I wanted to take up your question about funding content. What needs to happen is the BlackBerry Fund, which is RIM and RBC, need to get together with the Spectrum auction money and set up a major fund that innovative companies across technology, application, and content can apply to and get the kind of angel venture money that they need to really get on their feet. And then we need to look at capitalizing those companies. That's one of the most important things that we can do. There absolutely are mechanisms that are competitive and appropriate for our sectors. We need to put those in place, but we need to use that money to do that.
Well, that's a good point. There's definitely a problem in Canada with respect to capital for emerging companies, and we can have a lot of discussions about things at the top level, but at the cusp of creation of new entities, there is a shortage of funding, so that's very much an issue. I'd like to turn to the question, then we're going to get on to our next debate subject. Please.
Just a quick question. I'm always interested in these conversations about proceeds of auctions, taxes in some form or another, being channeled towards content producers. I'm totally in agreement with Sarah that these proceeds and these kinds of financial incentives should certainly be channeled towards innovation clusters, whatever those might be. My question about whether they should be channeled to content producers is one of, don't we do that or continue to do that in Canada at the peril of a market developing? There are market forces out there. Canadians use the internet. There are brands and advertisers who have a lot of money who want to get in front of these people, and the more that we prop it up with financial incentives from a government in the form of tax, I mean, let's be honest, there's two business models. People pay for it, directly or indirectly. Advertisers pay for it. Those are the two models that, there are varying levels that the levers can be pulled at, but those are the two ways in which content gets paid for. So don't we continue to go down this road at the peril of developing finally a market to support the kind of content we want to produce?
So there are, I think there are interesting models. One of the things that was very intriguing when Google started encouraging applications, they put up a prize. So it wasn't funds that were proportional on the basis of application. It was a pure 100% beauty contest. And that stimulated massive growth. In fact, much more than any of the, for instance, the BlackBerry thing is very much more structured. I mean, just as an observation, I don't think that you're going to drive much excitement with productivity applications. And that's the key difference, I think, about the notion of Google, where they're throwing in the funding is in the form of a contest. So essentially, to your point, it's really about market forces. If it's attractive and compelling, it has a chance. But a well-funded rock still sinks.